Hey everyone, I'm Action Kid. It's September 1st, 2019. I'm at Joe's Pizzeria in the Greenwich Village. It is 76 degrees Fahrenheit, 24 degrees Celsius, and I have myself here a New York City pizza slice. This is how you eat a pizza slice in New York City. You grab the top, fold it in half like this, and you just keep it closed, put it in your mouth, and go. And that is a good New York City pizza slice. I have here my friend Ariel from Urbanist Live.
Hello everyone.
You can meet him at his YouTube channel or Facebook page. He does walks of New York City, talks about history, architecture, food especially. You can check him out. But right now we're going to have some pizza together at Joe's Pizzeria in Greenwich Village.
And we're going to learn all the history of Greenwich Village,
Everything.
all the way to Alphabet City.
He's good.
It's a really cool walk. And if you want to check out more of my videos, you can go to Urbanist History of Cities. But today, I'm going to give all of you guys an experience because I love your videos on how immersive you get. And
I love his videos too. He's underappreciated. You have to check him out.
Thank you, thank you.
Right.
But today we're teaming forces and we're going to make something kick-ass.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, we're starting right now at Joe's Pizza. I've done over 600 videos of New York City. I've explored food all around the city in every single 5 boroughs, just like Action Kid over here has walked through every borough as well. And from my perspective, Joe's is among the best of the pizzas here. It's like the quintessential New York City slice. This is what you think of a New York City slice. It's not the Neapolitan slice, it's not the Sicilian slice. It's here, cheesy, flat-breaded, greasy, and oh so delicious. Let's give it a try. So, wow. It's filled with so much wonder. But where did pizza come from? Well, for that, we have to go back more than 100 years before, back to when the Italian Americans came over here. Most of them came from the modern day cities of Naples. And they brought with themselves a little bread pasta dish called pizza. However, when they came over here, they had to use American ingredients. And the very first pizzeria was Lombardi's in Soho. However, many years later, pizzerias started proliferating all around the city, and they started making these pizzerias with these very huge steel ovens. Joe's is one of those pizzerias. It opened here back in the late 1970s, and it's been a New York City staple ever since, even being featured in Spider-Man 2. All right, let's walk around. So speaking of Italian-American immigrants, this square we're in right in front of Joe's is called Father Demo Square. However, Father Demo is a very controversial figure. Let's go up here to this church. Greenwich Village, in context, let's go back into the 1920s. This would have been packed to the brim with Italian Americans, especially very, very poor Italian Americans that needed Catholic churches to visit. So they came over here to Father Demo Church, or also called Our Lady of Pompeii. But who was Father Demo? So this church is the exact recreation of another church of the same name in Italy called Our Lady of Pompeii, close to Naples. Father Demo was a Satanist in Italy, and he got caught by the Roman Catholic Church. They told him if he did not convert, then he would be persecuted, maybe even killed off. However, if he did convert, then they'll let him free. Father Demo had no choice and he decided to convert. However, he got so enamored with the Roman Catholic religion after being a Satanist for many years, he decided to devote his entire life to Roman Catholicism. And he came over here to America and opened up this church. So let's keep on walking through the rest of Greenwich Village. I absolutely love this neighborhood. Follow the rules when it comes to crossing the street. Don't be like a New Yorker. So how many times have you walked through here, Kenneth?
I don't know actually. I've been here too many times to count.
Too many times to count, exactly. And that's the case with almost every single New Yorker. This is like one of the go-to neighborhoods. There's a lot of shops, a lot of restaurants, of course, great pizza, great public spaces, and a lot of great cheap eats, which, you know what? Actually, we'll mention one of them right over here before we turn this way. We're also gonna bump into a bunch of little secrets all around. Now, the cool thing about this neighborhood is that aside from it being beautiful, it being very vibrant, it's filled with so much awesome history. But warning, some of that history is going to be dark. Let's go over here. So 1920s, filled with Italian Americans, but let's go a little bit further back, a little bit forward to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. This was the Bushwick Brooklyn of New York City at that time. Bushwick, as we know nowadays, is filled with like the young, cool kids. This was the epicenter of the young, cool kids. But the thing is, those young, cool kids end up becoming some of the top singers, songwriters, and musicians that we know of today, including Bob Dylan. However, unfortunately, I don't think Bob Dylan had access to a great cheap eat, which is ⁴ Bakery. I love ⁴ Bakery because they have amazing pork buns. Great pork buns, $1.50 each. This is also one of the best theaters in New York City, in my opinion. This is IFC Theater. And the cool thing about here is that they always have awesome first-run art house movies, but also awesome old movies playing usually at midnight. I've seen like stuff like Donnie Darko here, Aliens, many, many others. And feel free to ask me any questions whatsoever.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. I know you know these streets off the top of your head, so feel free to ask me anything about history in that case. Yeah. Quintessential New York City sport, handball. Quintessential, I say, because you can't really find handball anywhere. The only place where you can kind of find handball is in Ireland, but New York City is the spot to play handball.
That I didn't know about.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you go to Queens, you've done many Queens walks. Next time you do one, especially like in Flushing, Jackson Heights, Corona, pay attention to the handball courts because competition is fierce over there. So here there's a bunch of jazz clubs like the Blue Note. Cool thing about the Blue Note is it's one of the most popular jazz clubs in the entire world. Basically all the top jazz artists have played here at least once. And even the classic ones from the 50s, 60s, and 70s like Miles Davis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now this is kind of like a dying business in Greenwich Village, but Greenwich Village, it's no coincidence that Doctor Strange from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, police, always the case in New York City. Well, Doctor Strange's headquarters, dating all the way back to the comic books of the 1970s, is only a mere 2 blocks away. It's no coincidence that he was based here in Greenwich Village, because Greenwich Village used to be the center also of not just bohemian culture, also like weird mystic and occult culture. So before there used to be way more psychic shops, but there's still a few of them lingering. Yeah, which is cool.
Last night was cool. Light sleeper.
Are you gonna be okay with that?
If you're a fan of the show Louis by Louis C.K., it starts over here in the credits. This is one of the pizzerias. He buys a pizza for some reason, eats it. The song is playing, Louis, 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 and he just throws away the rest of the pizza. It's a grand shame. I have no idea why he did that. I have no idea. Why did you do that, Louis C.K.? Why, Louis? But I'll show you. Maybe we'll find Louis over here because I'll show you where he does his stand-up routines alongside a bunch of other famous comedians. This, the oldest Italian espresso shop in all of New York City since 1927. Now, I'm not sure if you'll be able to get a good look, but if you look straight ahead, that huge espresso machine is one of the most famous espresso machines because it's been featured in a bunch of movies, including The Godfather Part 2 and 3. So when you ever have the chance, go inside here. It was also David Bowie's favorite coffee shop. He will often order a cappuccino and sit out here very early in the morning. No one will bother him because no one will really recognize them. But here, let's get the answers from Louis C.K. Here, Louis C.K. has played, Dave Chappelle, Chris Smith, many other people. Basically, any famous comedian you can think of. Let's check them out. So here we have Bill Burr that's played here. Louis C.K. is also mentioned there. Who else do you recognize? Chris Rock. Yeah, basically any famous Dave Chappelle we see over there. Basically any famous comedian. This is the spot.
Comedy Cellar place.
And then for folk music, this was one of the top cafes where traditionally people like Bob Dylan, maybe the Mamas and the Papas, many others used to play here. One cool movie I would recommend seeing is Inside Llewyn Davis if you want to see this street, but in the 1950s. It's like really well done. All right, let's go. Let's get moving. Let's get moving to Washington Square Park.
Morning.
I totally walked on the walking sign. We're surrounded by NYU buildings right now. NYU basically owns the neighborhood of Greenwich Village.
Hey guys.
This video is going to feel like Grand Theft Auto 3 or Grand Theft Auto 4 or 5 because you're following me exactly right behind me. And it just reminds me of playing third person in Grand Theft Auto. Yeah. All right, let's steal a car. No, I'm just joking. We'll do that after the video.
The only difference is your wanted level doesn't go away.
In IRL, it doesn't go away. That's right. So welcome to Washington Square Park.
You want to go watch your face?
You know, like you could go to Central Park, you could go to Madison Square Park, but I think one of the most famous places for locals to hang out in tends to be Washington Square Park, and then also the nearby Union Square Park.
시원해부터 가봐.
Wait a minute, there's so many trees around here. Have you ever wondered what's the oldest tree in Washington Square Park?
What is it? Tell me.
Maybe I'm the only one wondering, but I know you're interested. Let's go. You could play chess here. I wouldn't call them hustlers. I would just call them people who teach you chess by beating anyone who comes in their way and paying them a lot of money for them to beat you. So one of those chess hustlers, fun fact, used to be Stanley Kubrick, who was the director of The Shining and Clockwork Orange and many other amazing films. Before he started making movies, in order to just make some money, he used to hustle for chess over here because he was great at chess. There's always buskers as well. Now, let's show that direction. There's a whole lot of people in that side of the park. But here, it's kind of empty. Why is that? Well, we'll find out after we learn about the oldest tree. So right here, after this tree, Hangman's Elm. This tree dates back to the early 1600s. It's older than the United States of America. It has seen even the American Revolution, has been dated to that era. Now, why do they call it Hangman's Elm? Well, its branches are really strong. According to legend, a woman who was one of the maids of the nearby mansions, which was all around Greenwich Village, she apparently lit the house on fire, committed arson. This apparently was wrongful accusation. However, nonetheless, since it was different times in America and they didn't respect the working class too much, they hung her right on top of these branches. Now, let's go a little bit further back to the times of the American Revolution. And the Marquis de Lafayette, who was the French admiral that helped George Washington, the founding fathers, to beat the British, he apparently was passing right through this area. He saw Hangman's Elm and saw many vagabonds being hung by its branches. However, that's probably all myth. It's still a nice, cool tree to look at.
It's a very nice tree,
Yeah.
very big.
So there we go. It's touching, we could touch if we wanted to, hundreds of years of history. But let's get back to why is it pretty empty in this side? Because we're gonna walk to the other side, you'll notice it's much more packed. Well, about 20 years or so ago, there was repairs done with the park because especially after the 1980s, most of the parks in New York City went to massive disrepair. Washington Square Park was one of them. And Con Edison, which is the company, the electric company of New York City, came to repair a lot of the electrical lines underneath. And as they were digging underneath of Washington Square Park, they came by something really hard on the ground. They couldn't dig further. What they came upon was a coffin. However, they decided, okay, this is one coffin. This is pretty normal to find one coffin being buried. They kept on digging. Another coffin. Then they decided to dig on the other side of this side of the park, which is the southern side. And then they came up even more coffins and more coffins, and then piles of bones. An estimated 20,000 people are buried right underneath our feet, right at this moment. They're still buried underneath because they couldn't exhume all the bodies. But why was that? Well, for that we have to learn a little bit about the parks in the middle of New York City. Washington Square Park, which is where we're located right now, Union Square and Madison Square, and many others up Manhattan, are very porous land, so the land is not really good for construction. So if you build something, you can easily lose your house. So no one wants to buy land in this area. And what do you do with very poor land? Well, you end up using it as paupers' graves, or also known as potter's fields. And potter's fields are the people who are either not named, they couldn't identify, or they were too poor to afford a tomb or a graveyard. They would be buried in this park and many of the other parks in New York City. However, unlike the other parks in New York City, people are still buried underneath. Let's walk through the middle over here. So, is it emptier because of that? Well, I don't know. This just always strikes me as weird. This side is always much emptier than the other side. Now, according to legend, at night, this side of the park has a very soft green mist always lurking above. Maybe that green mist is just people having fun. Who knows? Investigate yourself. Let us know in the comments. So these break dancers over here, which we're going to approach, let's approach them. Just a fair warning. It's awesome to see outdoor shows in New York City. However, this will be a time sink because it's about 40 minutes of hype and about 2 minutes of jumping. Just fair warning. I respect their art, but just fair warning. It's going to be time intensive. Now back to the days of Bob Dylan in the late 50s, early 60s. During the weekends, Washington Square Park would be packed to the brim. Just imagine 3 times the amount of people here concentrating in Washington Square Park. A bunch of people taking out their guitars, their flutes, their ukuleles, all wonderful instruments. Here we have the Washington Square Park Monument. Now, let's go even further back to like about the 1910, 1915, around there. A group of bohemians, famous artists, decided to go all the way up to the top of Washington Square Park Arc. And yes, there is a top, there is a staircase, which I'll show you. And they went up to the top, lit up a bunch of lanterns, a bonfire, had a bunch of cups of tea, and declared Greenwich Village an independent nation. However, the lights ended up causing too much of a ruckus, and the cops took notice, went up, and arrested them. And Greenwich Village was never an independent nation after that. Now this looks a whole lot like a very famous landmark in Paris. And it's because it's almost an exact copy. This is a copy of the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, France. However, this was not the original. The original was made out of wood for a huge parade of firemen, made by one of the most famous architects in New York City history, Stanford White. Stanford White is one such architect that was deeply inspired by the École des Beaux-Arts, which was the school of architecture in Paris. So a lot of his architecture is Beaux Arts architecture, which you'll see all around New York City. And it's like a mishmash of all classical art styles, Greek, Roman, sometimes a little bit Byzantine. But where is the staircase? Right over here. Now because of the drums, this is gonna feel like Birdman. Have you ever seen that movie? Watch that movie if you haven't seen it. Great New York City movie. I told the guy to be here, but he's not here right now. New Yorkers, they're always late. Probably got stuck in the subway. But yeah, that's the staircase that goes up there. Washington Square Park, named after our main man in America, George Washington. George Washington is the general, and now that you're swiping to George Washington, the statesman. However, we have a fountain after the arc. This fountain and this arc is aligned with Fifth Avenue. However, the fountain, as it was originally made, was about 2 degrees off. And the Greenwich Village community decided to ask the New York City government, to spend tens of millions of dollars to move it a few inches, just so it would be perfectly aligned with Fifth Avenue. There we go, the more you know. This is the house from Will Smith's movie I Am Legend, where he was escaping a bunch of vampires. And he took refuge in this house, had cars all along the side of his street armed with landmines. Hopefully these cars aren't armed with landmines though. So now we're making our way to East Village. We're only a few blocks away. Now I talked a little bit earlier about Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange from Marvel Comics has a lot of influences from a real life man whose name was Aleister Crowley. He was known as one of the most famous occultists of the 1900s. He lived in New York City for a while, right in this apartment. If you've watched recently the show Good Omens, he's referenced by the main character who's played by David Tennant, who goes by a very similar name, Crawley rather than Crowley. And to tie that to Doctor Strange, Aleister Crowley was also an influence on Stephen Ditko, who wrote Doctor Strange, the original comics. All right. Well, so there's an art fair here. That's awesome. Oh, that's cool.
That's this guy.
So basically all this is NYU, New York University. One of the most expensive schools in the nation. Costs over $40,000 a year for tuition. And people still come here. I have no idea why. Great bubble tea right there, boba guys, or boba tea. Ooh, give you a nice fun fact. I'm not sure if on video you'll be able to see that skyscraper that has no windows. Maybe you'll be able to see on video, but maybe I'll give you a teaser if we ever do a video again in the Tribeca area. That's a skyscraper, 29 stories tall with 0 windows. Why? Well, stay tuned whenever we do Tribeca. It's a crazy story, I assure you. So now we're passing Broadway. All right, Action Kid, meet me at the corner because I'm going to buy a little New York City treat that I think everyone will enjoy. But meet me at the corner. I don't want to spoil it. Go, 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 go. So another quintessential New York City treat is the donuts. This is one of the best donut places in New York City. The original one is located at 7th Avenue and 14th Street, and they recently opened up their outpost here. The original one was open 24 hours, which is one of the reasons why donuts are so iconic, because you can find them literally at any time of the day in America. And here is where really donuts got its start. But before we start talking a little bit more about the donuts, let's take a bite of this. Ooh. All right, grab yourself up. Do you want a piece?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, grab that slice. There we go. All right, so let's bite into this donut. What do you think?
It's so quick, so creamy, sugary, it's chewy too.
So creamy, chewy, sugary. I love it. Yeah, and the cool thing is this is a yeast donut as well. However, this really got its start in New York City because before there ever was a New York City, this was called New Amsterdam, and the Dutch were originally the ones who colonized this area. They brought with them, I can't pronounce the Dutch word, but it translates into oily cakes. And oily cakes are basically big puffs of dough that are made deep fried. The thing is, oily cakes tend to have, since they're a pure piece of dough, the middle always tends to be gooey and kind of raw, doughy. A lot of people didn't like the middle parts. So they used to fill them up with nuts, hence the word dough nut. However, how did it get its whole? Well, it got its whole apparently from a very famous merchant captain whose mother was very well known for making some of the best oily cakes. One time he was on a ship with a bunch of the oily cakes made by his mother, and he came across a storm. As the storm was coming, he was about to bite into his donut. He had to put the sail in order to sail through the storm. So out of panic, because he wanted to save his amazing donut, he pushed the oily cake right through the middle of the spokes of the wheel for the ship, and when he pulled it out, it had a hole in it and no raw doughy part in the middle. Hence the beginning of the donuts. Cheers. This might help with drying up. Yeah. Now it's normal in New York City to walk and eat, unlike maybe other cities in the world. But here you can definitely walk and eat. Actually, like if you're a New Yorker, you don't have time to sit down. No, just joking. I hate that. However, why donuts? Why were donuts associated with police officers? As you can see, many movies usually depict the very overweight police officer munching on donuts late at night. Well, in New York City, especially during the 1970s, a lot of the donut shops, like the donut pub that opened up in the 60s, were 24 hours. You can't really find other types of food at 3 a.m. in New York City. Yes, it's a city that never sleeps, but back in the 1970s, it slept for a few hours. You couldn't generally find food that late at night. Donuts were the only thing you could find food of. So cops used to eat a bunch of donuts during their late night patrols. And then it was depicted in 1970s films like Death Wish and many, many others that you probably can name in the comments. And that's how it got its association. Here is another iconic New York City hangout for New Yorkers specifically. Now, right here, this building holds the smartest supercomputer in the entire world. It's IBM Watson, right inside that building. But right in front of the building is the Alamo Cube, or also people know as the Astor Place Cube. This cube you can spin around. It's been in place here since the 1970s. It's basically the only movable artwork. That's impressive. The woman is spinning on her own. It's generally hard to do so. But back in the 1960s, oh, actually not 1960s, sorry. Back in like 2016, there was a rumor that a man was living inside the cube. There was even photos posted on many blogs all around online, on Gawker, Gizmodo, many others, Gothamist as well. They showed about a man living very cramped inside the cube. Apparently rent got so high in New York City that he had no other choice but to move into the movable sculpture that we have here. However, that was a complete hoax. Very elaborate hoax made by a performance artist. So we saw NYU, one of the most expensive schools in America. Here's Cooper Union, one of the cheapest schools in America. Though it's extremely prestigious because the tuition is very low, but because it's super low, they are super selective in who they admit to the school of architecture, arts, and engineering. These light pole mosaics, you'll see them all around East Village. We're now officially in the neighborhood of East Village. Well, we call this NoHo, but after this avenue over here is East Village. I don't remember the artist's name off the top of my head. However, he did make this during the AIDS crisis in honor of a lot of the people who lost their lives during that time. So now let's go to the coolest street in all of Manhattan, St. Mark's Place, here in the East Village. And we'll see why it's so cool. That is one of the coolest buildings. That's Cooper Union, the newer campus building. So St. Mark's Place, this is 8th Street, though it's a tiny bit wider than most other streets. And the reason for that is that it originally was a place for luxury apartments, and the person who bought up this plot of land convinced the city to allow him a few extra feet for the street. But this street is famous for a few reasons. One of the main reasons is back in the 1980s, it was where punk really took off in America. And you have infamous punk bands getting their start here, like the Ramones, and also hardcore bands later in the 90s. Andy Warhol was one of the first ones to move to St. Mark's with his venue called the Electric Circus, which was around this area over here. Ooh, oh, okay. Here's a good legend about New York City. Well, actually, this is probably more truth than legend because there is actual photographic evidence. So here in this karaoke bar, one day, probably in like 2010-ish, there was a group of young Korean Americans singing karaoke. And as they were singing karaoke, a man went through the door and they were in utter shock. Because this man was one of the most famous actors in the entire world, Bill Murray. And he joined them for a few rounds of karaoke. There's photos, there's everything. He did not know them at all. He just randomly went to the karaoke bar and just joined them. Bill Murray is said to have done that so many times. So if you're lucky, maybe you'll bump into Bill Murray. So another place where you can see the remnants of the old punk culture and then later hardcore is shops like Search and Destroy, where you can buy second-hand punk clothing, the craziest clothing. Viewer discretion is advised if you go there with little kids. Do not go there with little kids. Let's see if we can, man, those faces are weird. First time I noticed that one. Let's see if we can find signs of, they might be hidden beneath the scaffolding, but if you look closely, when you look up, always look up in New York City, you can find remnants of German signs on these buildings. The German signs on these buildings were because, as we talked about, Greenwich Village used to be a huge Italian-American neighborhood. This, in the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, used to be a huge German-American neighborhood. And this was called Klein Deutschland, Little Germany. However, suddenly they moved out of nowhere around 1911, around there. So this is the pizzeria that made $1 pizza super popular. It's actually, I think, one of the best dollar slices in New York, from my opinion. Oh, there's Joe's Steamed Rice Rolls now here. One of the best places in Flushing, Queens for rice rolls is now opening up in St. Mark's. That's awesome. That's really cool. So one fun fact about New Yorkers, they love making lines. You'll see lines everywhere. Line for a cronut, line for a Supreme bag, line for a Supreme brick. That's true. There was an actual brick made by a Supreme. There's always lines everywhere. I'm not sure what this line is for, but there's always lines in New York City.
Like if I didn't get.
You live too, Jay? He used to look at my house. Let me pet him.
All right. Would you like to know another haunted history? All right, let's go. Action Kid said yes. He said yes. He's asking for it. Fair warning, it's very scary. Let's go over here.
It says stay. What the fuck was that? Stop. It says stop.
Ooh, here we're able to find the German lettering right there. We'll get closer to it.
Can't go.
So this is Bibliothek, and then over there it says Deutsch something. In New York, you can walk in the middle of the street, especially if you're very good at the game of Frogger. So here we can see the German lettering that I mentioned earlier. (1857). Wow, this building is a lot older than I thought it was. So let's find out why St. Mark's is called St. Mark's Place. Who was St. Mark's? Well, we're gonna find out. This is 9th Street. 9th Street is Little Tokyo. Bunch of awesome Japanese places, including a great sake bar right down there, Speakeasy. The other side of 9th Street, on the other side of 2nd Avenue, there are a bunch of amazing vintage shops. To clarify vintage, I mean thrift clothing and secondhand clothing. And also jewelry and glasses as well. Let's start setting up the scene. Going way, way back. As I mentioned, New York City used to be called New Amsterdam when the Dutch were here. That changed when the British invaded. However, when the British invaded, there was a man in control of New Amsterdam. He was a crank, basically. He outlawed drinking at night. He also did not allow anyone to really fraternize on Sundays. Really weird for the Dutch because the Dutch love to drink. This man's name was the Director General of New Amsterdam, Peter Stuyvesant. We'll find his face over here. Usually we can go in, but it seems to be closed at this point. But Peter Stuyvesant's face is right down there. We'll be able to see it. I think you can zoom in. So Peter Stuyvesant was a notorious crank. As I mentioned, he outlawed drinking. When the Dutch loved drinking, he did not allow people to fraternize on Sundays. People just didn't like him because he was too strict. However, the British invaded. And when the British invaded, he wanted to fight back. But a little context on New Amsterdam. New Amsterdam was run by the VOC, which was the East India Company. They were a company. They weren't the Dutch army. They weren't the Dutch crown. Well, the Dutch didn't have a crown, but they weren't the army of the Netherlands. They were a private company. Being a private company, everyone who lived here were people who were merchants. So they had no interest in fighting for any land, especially the Dutch. They were very mercantile people. So when the British came, Peter Stuyvesant, one detail about Peter Stuyvesant, he had a wooden leg and with huge metallic bracings. He lost this leg when he was fighting in the Caribbean, trying to defend the island of Nevis, I think from the French. And they put a huge cannonball right through his leg and he lost it. So everyone who lived here were mercantile people. They really didn't care who took over this land. They were also open to any religion. So Christians lived here, Jews lived here, anyone could live here. Also Native Americans, a few of them lived here as well. African people as well. So when the British invaded, Peter Stuyvesant wanted to fight back. He tried to gather his forces and no one wanted to fight. They didn't care. They didn't want to be killed off by the British. But Peter Stuyvesant at all costs was like, let's fight, let's crush the British. However, no one had his back. So the British came and they walked right in to New York City and took over. Peter Stuyvesant couldn't do anything, despite his fighting spirits. So he went back to the Netherlands, explained what happened, that the Dutch took over. Dutch couldn't really do anything. They tried to attack, they couldn't. So now New Amsterdam ended up becoming New York City. However, Peter Stuyvesant liked this area, so he decided to stay here, not go back to the Netherlands. So he moved to this area of modern-day East Village, and he set up what he called a bowery. A bowery is the Dutch word for a farm. You'll see the word bowery with the nearby street down there called the Bowery. The reason the Bowery is called is after the Dutch word for farm. So he set up a farm here with a little chapel called St. Mark's in the Bowery. So his final days were spent here. However, later in his life, he woke up and saw that his house was burning down to the ground. Everything was burning in sight, and he lost his house. He was walking through the rubble, deeply saddened. Peter Stuyvesant died a few months later. But then let's go many decades later, almost a century later. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, the bell starts ringing. The bell that's still up there. In that time, when the bell rings, people know that there is going to be a massive fire. There is something wrong, there's a disaster. Everyone has to wake up and do something. So they all rush to the church. The septon, who was the caretaker of this church, was outside, completely pale-faced. People were asking, hey, let's go inside. They tried to open up the door, it was locked. The septon said, no, you can't go in. There's a man inside. The reason he was so pale-faced is because he saw a man walking through the church with a wooden leg going across the floor. People started crushing on the door, and they got through the door. And once they got through the door, they rushed up to the bell, went up to the bell, stopped ringing, and they tried to see the rope to see how it was rung, and the rope was cut off, way taller than any man could reach. There was no stool, there was no evidence of what happened to the rest of the rope. It was about 10 feet high, so no one could reach it. This was very weird. The rope was cut off. How was it rung in the first place? Well, the townspeople went downstairs to the crypt, which is right underneath our feet. and they went to Peter Stuyvesant's grave. And on top of his grave, they found the cut-off rope. No one was in this church aside from the pale-faced septon who scurried outside. Who rung the bell? No one knows. Was it the ghost of Peter Stuyvesant? No one knows. Zoom, many decades later, early 1900s. Another service is happening here, this time during the daytime. This was a Calvinist church for quite a while. And the priest was giving his sermon, and suddenly he looked utterly shocked. Because amongst the crowd of people, he saw a man dressed out of his time. In the early 1900s, he saw a man dressed what seemed like 1600s. So he continued with the sermon, and then as the mass ended, he tried to go up to the man. The man started walking to one of the doors inside the church, into one of the rooms where they used to keep wine. And as he tried to open up the door to follow the man inside, the man disappeared into the wall. Ever since then, people say at night that they hear a wooden leg streaking across the church at night. So, is Peter Stuyvesant pissed off that the entire neighborhood of East Village is gentrifying, just like all of New Amsterdam suddenly turned British? Maybe. I've been here many times at night. I have not heard anything yet, but I still come hoping that I can bump into good old P-Sty. Oh, and there's one thing they'll tie to our story later. So keep this one in mind as we go a little bit further down. It's hard to get it, but this guy over here, his name is Tompkins. Tompkins was the vice president, I think under James Madison, if I'm correct, but he was the vice president. However, he resigned. Well, we'll get to why he resigned when we go to the park named after his honor, just a few short blocks away. But before we do, this is Stuyvesant Street, named after Peter Stuyvesant, the man we just talked about. This street is now according to the grid system. So New York City has a grid system that goes all the way above Houston Street, all the way to the very top of the island. It's in a perfect grid. However, there's a few exceptions. This is one such exception because this street predates the grid system, and also a lot of rich people lived here, including Alexander Hamilton's family. However, there's another misconception with Manhattan. If you take out a Manhattan map, which you always provide at the beginning of your videos, a lot of people assume that we're in the East Village, so the East Village is on the east side, or geographically on the east, and the West Village, the other side of Manhattan, is geographically on the west. However, the map shows it as flat like that, but actually Manhattan is going down this way. So the Museum of Natural History, which is technically on the west side, is more east than where we are facing right now. The only true east-west street is none of the streets according to the grid system. The only true east-west street is here, Stuyvesant Street. Yeah. All right. So now for a final stop, Tompkins Square Park. What used to be one of the most dangerous parks in New York City, and a park where anarchists fought off the cavalry of the NYPD. We'll find out about that as we go there. Is that Peter Stuyvesant? He's pissed off again. He's pissed off. Another cafe opened in East Village. Damn it. Here there's a Hall of Fame of many Yiddish stars. There used to be a lot of Yiddish theaters around this area. This is a very iconic 24-hour restaurant called the Cellar. It's Ukrainian. Dates back to 1954. And the cool thing is it's open 24 hours. So instead of getting yourself a donut, you can get yourself an actual meal. Or you can get the actual meal and then eat a donut. So like Peter Stuyvesant is protesting all the new coffee shops that are opening up in this area. Coffee could get very expensive here in New York City, especially lattes. However, here Puerto Rico, I think, is one of the best coffee shops in all New York City, but it's also very inexpensive. A latte costs you about $2.50 as opposed to $5 or $6. Here's one of the skittiest buildings in New York City.
So
one true mark of a New Yorker is speed. One of the older bookshops that still survive in the city, East Village Books. And this, in my opinion, is one of the best restaurants in New York City, Cafe Mogador. It's a very good price, medium end restaurant. It's beautiful inside, great food, and it's Moroccan as well. Always packed as well for brunch. And now we are approaching Alphabet City. It's called Alphabet City because we just passed First Avenue. Now we're heading to Avenue A, and then there's Avenue B and Avenue C and D, and yeah, that's all the avenues. This is Criff Dog's hot dog place, but inside the hot dog place, there is a phone booth. You can't really see, we won't go inside, but there is a phone booth, and that phone booth leads to a speakeasy called PDT, which stands for Please Don't Tell. We have to make reservations before, so if you want to go to a really cool speakeasy, that's one great one to go. Now back to what I mentioned earlier, the anarchists of Tompkins Square Park. Tompkins Square Park used to be one of the most dangerous parks in all of New York City. Today, not so much, but before, it was a park where you could buy every single drug you ever wanted. And also, it was a park where a bunch of anarchist punks were settling in. And they built a bunch of tents. They basically built a mini tent village in Tompkins Square Park. This area was so dangerous, Alphabet City, that there was a saying where if you go to Avenue A, you have to be very brave to do so. Yeah, let's pass over here. Here's Tompkins Square Park. It's an awesome park. Always people here. There's always there's usually buskers and people playing instruments. But let's end over here with this water fountain. Now a little bit about East Village and Alphabet City. This is one of the best places by far to go drinking. There's always amazing bars around, lots of great speakeasies like PDT, many others, lots of great restaurants. This is a place to go to New York City at night, by far. Here we have a water fountain, a very ornate water fountain. You really don't see ornate water fountains in New York City. Usually most water fountains are not very good. On the side of it, it says, well, right over there is the water bearer. And on the side it says charity. And over here, it says temperance. Back in the early 1900s, there was a man who was obsessed with temperance. He wanted to illegalize alcohol at all costs. He thought it was poisoning the people who lived here. And that is a very nasty, that's a very nasty water fountain. He wanted to illegalize alcohol at all costs, and he was part of the temperance movement. However, this man thought to himself, okay, people are probably drinking because they're just thirsty. They just want some water. At the time, there wasn't really that easy access to clean water. New York City was very cramped, very tight, a bunch of people moving here. It was one of the most densely places on Earth. So he organized to build a bunch of water fountains all around the city, and this is one of the last surviving ones. Lo and behold, people did not stop drinking after drinking from this water fountain. They were thirsty and they kept on drinking. But also another irony is the name of this park. I mentioned the actor who, the vice president who decided to, who passed away and was buried right by St. Mark's Church in the Bowery. This park is named right after him. And this vice president resigned during his term. But why did he resign? Well, he resigned because unfortunately he suffered from alcoholism. And he couldn't control his alcoholism. He had to step away from his office. And unfortunately, a few months later, he passed away. The park is named after him. They built this temperance fountain in order to curb people from drinking. However, ironically, the entire neighborhood right now is surrounded by a bunch of bars. Oh, the irony. There we go. I hope you enjoyed this story that I took all of you on. If you want to see more of my videos, you can go to facebook.com/urbanistlive. And then on YouTube, I'm also at Urbanist History of Cities. I'm so glad we went on this walk.
All right, everyone. I hope you enjoy this walk with Ariel from Urbanist. Like I said again, be sure to check out his channel and Facebook group. It's really, really awesome. I hope you learned a lot during this video. I'll keep you all posted when I next post a video. If you subscribe, and you have to hit that notification bell, hit the like button as well.
Hit it twice.
And I'll see you all next time.
Bye, everyone.